He was a man born from storm winds and sharpened steel, a terror whispered across kingdoms long before his longships ever touched their shores. Ragnar Lothbrok. Not a hero, not a king, but the father of fury itself. A man whose sons would drown nations in fire, and whose own legend was carved from serpent storms and the shattered bones of empires. But here's the truth you were never told. Ragnar is not a story of glory. He is the shadow that fell across an entire age, the ghost behind 1,000 deaths, and the monster Christian Europe prayed would never return. This is how one man became ruin. Before we descend deeper into the storm, a quick word. If this saga grips you, if the fury of Ragnar's rise pulls you in like a tide, then pause for a second, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and strike that bell like a Viking hammer. Every comment, every share, it's not just fuel for the algorithm, it's what keeps forgotten stories alive. Now, back to the man who didn't just shake kingdoms, he unmade them. Long before Ragnar became a name feared across seas, a different war was brewing, not of swords, but of collapse. The mighty empire of Charlemagne was cracking under its own weight. Sons of kings turned on each other, thrones shattered, borders blurred, and from the fog-drenched north came hunger. Hunger for land, for gold, for glory, and for revenge. The Frankish kingdoms, once united, now lay fractured, soft targets for something older than armies and crueler than kings. The Viking tide had begun to rise. Not yet Ragnar, not yet fury, but ripples of ruin were already spreading across the coastlines like whispers of coming war. The Frankish world was tearing itself apart, and the North watched. At first, only a few longships tested the edges of the broken empire. Dozens soon followed, then hundreds. And somewhere within this rising storm, a new kind of warlord appeared. He wasn't a petty raider. He wasn't a wandering jarl looking for pocketfuls of silver. He was something else. Frankish chronicles speak of a force so vast, so coordinated, that it felt less like an army and more like a curse. Over 120 ships cutting through the Seine, 5,000 warriors surging toward Paris, led by a man the scribes called Ragnar Harris, a name many now whisper was Ragnar himself. His attack wasn't reckless, it was surgical. He struck small armies first, destroying them in full view of the helpless soldiers across the river who could only watch their comrades die. Survivors, around 100, were sacrificed to Odin on a lonely island in the Seine. Their bodies hung like grim offerings. Word spread not of a man, but of a plague wearing a human face. Paris prepared for death. Ragnar prepared for history. On Easter Sunday, a deliberate insult, a psychological strike, Ragnar's forces descended on Paris. He burned the outskirts. He strangled the supply lines. He turned the city into a coffin waiting to be nailed shut. But even monsters bleed. Disease ripped through Ragnar's camp, weakening his warriors, threatening to undo the victory already within his grasp. Yet even then, the Franks didn't dare fight him. They paid him 6,000 pounds of gold and silver, the first of many Danegelds. A kingdom buying its survival, a warlord buying his legend. And when Ragnar returned to Denmark, he carried not just treasure, but proof. Proof that Christian kings could be broken. Proof that empires could be bent. Proof that the world was soft and he was not. For most men, a victory like Paris would define a lifetime. For Ragnar, it was only a beginning. Because long before he terrorized kings, His legend was already being carved in stranger places, in sagas, in runes, in whispers where myth bleeds into truth. The stories say his fury wasn't forged on battlefields, but in trials that felt carved straight from the jaws of the gods. One tale speaks of a serpent, a monstrous creature guarding the daughter of a jarl. Warriors fled from it. Ragnar walked toward it, wearing cowhide trousers boiled in pitch, the hairy breeches that would give him his name, Lothbrok. He killed the beast, he won the girl, and he built a reputation the way other men built shields. Another saga remembers a different wife, Lagertha, the shield maiden who fought like a storm-given flesh, cutting down enemies at Ragnar's side. Some call her myth, some call her real. But all agree on one thing: even Ragnar's lovers were legends. And then came Aslaug, daughter of Sigurd the Dragon Slayer, descendant of heroes, raised in secrets and prophecy with her. Ragnar's story took on a new shape, no longer just a warrior, but a man being prepared by fate. His sons, Ivar the Boneless, Bjorn Ironside, Sigurd Snake in the Eye, wouldn't just raid coastlines, they would devour kingdoms. But legends don't rise without rivals. And Ragnar's growing fame meant something dangerous in the north. Men with crowns began to fear him. Men with kingdoms began to envy him. And the gods, if the sagas are true, began to test him. Because every saga, every poem, every whispered tale agrees on one grim truth. Ragnar Lothbrok was not meant to live quietly. He was meant to burn. Ragnar had carved his name into the bones of Francia, but victory has a way of poisoning men like him. Because the sagas agree on one thing: Ragnar couldn't stand still. The world was changing, kingdoms were shifting, and the Viking Age was beginning to roar across Europe, turning monasteries into pyres and coastlines into graveyards. The world was softer than Ragnar remembered, and that softness was an invitation. After Paris, the sagas say Ragnar's fame spread so widely that other kings and jarls began to fear him, envy him, or quietly plot against him. The North had never seen a man rise so fast, so violently, with so many followers willing to die under his banner. Ragnar had become the prototype of the Sea King, a warlord strong enough to raid, conquer, and claim land without answering to anyone. But fame carries a curse, because the more the legends grew, the more Ragnar began to feel something slipping from his grasp. Not treasure, not land, not power, legacy. His sons, Ivar, Bjorn, Sigurd, Snake in the Eye, were already being spoken of as future Stormbringers. Their names were spreading across Scandinavia, reaching as far as the British Isles and the courts of Europe. And Ragnar, the man who had once terrified entire kingdoms, felt his legend dimming in their wake. For a Viking, that is a fate worse than death. So Ragnar chose a path that even his closest warriors begged him to abandon. He would reclaim his glory. He would prove he was still the father of fury, and he would do it alone. No massive fleet, no unstoppable horde, no sons, just a handful of ships, and a burning need to remind the world who he was. The sagas tell us that Ragnar sailed to England with only a few vessels, planning to raid Northumbria and rekindle his legend. But instead of terrified monks and scattered militias, he met a king who had been waiting for him. Ella, a ruler with a personal grudge and a cruel imagination. Ella knew the stories. He'd heard the rumors. He'd listened to every tale that claimed Ragnar could not be killed by ordinary means, so he didn't use ordinary means. Ragnar was captured before he even reached the heart of Northumbria. dragged in chains, mocked, beaten, broken, but not silent. Ella ordered him thrown into a pit writhing with venomous snakes, a death meant to erase every myth ever told about him. But the sagas say Ragnar did not scream, he did not beg, he did not tremble, he laughed, because he believed fate had already spoken, and his death, this death, would not be the end of his story. His final cry echoed through the chamber. How the little piglets would grunt if they knew how the old boar suffers. A warning, not to Ella, but to the sons who would drown England in blood to avenge him. At that moment, Ragnar Lothbrok, the father of fury, died. But his ruin was just beginning. When Ragnar fell into the serpent pit, Northumbria believed the terror of the North had died with him. They were wrong. Because news of Ragnar's death did not travel quietly. It exploded across Scandinavia. Ivar the Boneless, Bjorn Ironside, Halfdan, Ubba, Sigurd Snake in the Eye. These were not sons. They were omens, carved from prophecy, raised on violence, and forged under a man who believed destiny belonged only to those willing to bleed for it. And when they learned how their father died, the sagas say the ground itself shook beneath them with rage. The piglets Ragnar warned about were ready to tear the world apart. England had seen raids before, scattered, bloody, brutal. But what came next was something different. It wasn't a raid. It wasn't a fleet. It wasn't even an army. It was the largest Viking invasion Europe had ever seen. Hundreds of ships, thousands of warriors, clans united who had once been enemies, a horde driven not by plunder, but by vengeance. The Anglo-Saxon records speak of a vast force arriving in 865, a great army unlike anything the island had faced. Many historians now recognize this as Ragnar's sons assembling every war band they could to avenge him. Kings trembled, villages burned, and the banner of the raven, the symbol of Odin's chosen, rose over the shores of England. The sons of Ragnar had come, and they would not leave until England's kings were dust. Northumbria was the first to fall. Ella, the king who believed Ragnar's death would be the end of his problems, suddenly found himself facing not a rebellion, but a catastrophe. He marched out with his army. He faced the sons directly, and he failed, spectacularly. The Vikings crushed him. His men died screaming. His defenses shattered, and according to the sagas, Ragnar's sons delivered justice the way they believed fate intended. Slow, merciless, remembered. Many medieval accounts describe Ella's execution, the blood eagle, as a ritual punishment, splitting the ribs and pulling the lungs through the opening, offered as vengeance to Odin. Whether myth or fact, this was the moment Ragnar's warning became prophecy. The old boar had suffered. Now the little piglets had come to make the world listen. Once Ella fell, the sons did not stop. Because Ragnar's death wasn't just a wound, it was a command. Wessex, Mercia, East Anglia, kingdom after kingdom collapsed under the weight of the great heathen army. We know from the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle and the Frankish annals that real historical Viking leaders, Bjorn Ironside, Ivar Ubba, were active during this exact period, striking fear into Europe and carving their names into the continent's history. The vengeance that began in Northumbria became a campaign of domination, a reshaping of England's map, a rewriting of its history, and in every burning city, every shattered monastery, every battlefield turned graveyard, one truth was whispered. This is Ragnar's revenge. So who was he, really? A Danish warlord? A composite of many Viking chieftains, a myth crafted to legitimize future kings who needed a legendary ancestor to justify conquering England, or a real man whose deeds were so violent, so unforgettable, that no single chronicle could contain him? Some historians point to a Viking leader named Regan Harris, the same figure who led 120 ships up the Seine and sacrificed 111 Frankish soldiers on an island near Paris. Others claim Ragnar was Lothbrok of the 12th century annals, a father whose daughters wove the legendary Raven banner, captured by the English in 878. Some see him as Ragnar, a warlord who led raids across Ireland and Scotland, and others believe he was never one man at all, but an avatar, a single name meant to contain the fury of an entire people. Maybe that's the real secret. Maybe Ragnar Lothbrok wasn't meant to be understood. He was meant to be feared. Whether man, myth, or both, Ragnar's shadow never disappeared. Every kingdom his sons touched changed forever. Every chronicle that mentioned him spoke of devastation. Every saga that carried his name added another layer of fire, prophecy, or blood. He is the ghost behind the Viking Age, the spark behind Europe's greatest panic, the father of warriors who treated nations like kindling. And the truth is simple. It doesn't matter how much of Ragnar was legend, because the ruin he left behind was real. In the end, history asks the wrong question. Not who was Ragnar, but how many empires would still stand today if Ragnar Lothbrok had never been born? The sagas are silent, but the ruins still answer, and they say his name, even now.